Misha here, and the reason I have done several Star Wars videos is that's kind of what's been out here at the cabin. Last time I got snowed in. But even though I saw Star Wars first when I was a little kid, and that was kind of a thing, I'd say I got into Star Trek when I was a little bit older, 8, 9, 10. And I'm probably more versed in it, more interested. I don't know. I like both. I really do. But I do have, unfortunately, not all the old Eagle Moss models out here, but I found in the cabin something I brought out for the very first video I recorded out here. My Eagle Moss Star Trek shuttles. So what I thought I would do, since I felt like making a video, I'm not going to directly talk about these in universe. I've got another box of them here too that has the remainder. It's also where I keep their stands. I want to talk about my memories of liking Star Trek and my thoughts, good and bad, about the series, because there's shuttles from the original series, from TNG, DS9, Voyager, Enterprise, and yes, they even did the Kelvin, but that's when, of course, Eagle Moss went, so it's where it stops. And one reason I kind of popped out here to the cabin, just honestly for a brief time, this is the 5-year anniversary of my father passing this week, and I just kind of wanted to be alone, if that makes sense. But I was thinking about a day when I went to a Star Trek convention with my mother. He didn't go to those things, but it was on a Saturday, and I believe Will Wheaton was one of the guests there. I think John Delancey was after that. I think that was Will Wheaton. And I remember coming home, he asked us how we were. He was always supportive of us going. He wasn't a very social person in that way. And then we watched The Thing on TV. And I don't mean 1982, The Thing. I mean the original one, 1957. And he remarked that was one of his favorites when he was young. He would have been about 15, 16 when that came out. So we watched that. So it was just one of those, average days that you don't think much about at the time. I've learned that she's a bit of a drama queen. She's not actually being hurt, but she just does that. Anyway, but I look back on it as a very fond memory. So that's the first one I wanted to share before I bring out my first ship, or should I say, shuttle. Let's reach over. Grab the very first Star Trek Starfleet shuttle, the Galileo 7, at least the type. Class F seems to be the only kind of quasi-name. Of course, when TOS began, they did not have a shuttle model. It was actually kind of funny when they would get trapped on a planet and act like the transporter was the only way up, when there was this giant honking shuttle bay on the back of the model of the Constitution class. But as I'm sure you know the story, AMT and all that, the model company helped them build the shuttle. And they did, 3/4 scale for the live action. And of course they had a model they could cruise through space. And basically, if you were on a shuttle, it was either going to crash or lose power. That was just how shuttles were. And this established, what a Star Trek shuttle looked like. It was about, 6, 7 meters long. Obviously held at least 7, probably more, because they were in the first episode, the Galileo 7. One debate I found is completely ludicrous. Some said, these weren't warp capable. One, there's nacelles right there. I can't see them. You can, though. 2, do you realize how big space is? Well, to be fair, the creators of TOS didn't always either, because more than once they mixed up the word galaxy with the word solar system and universe. So they weren't 100% consistent there. But it was the 60s. Yeah, we have to kind of, forgive them for not getting scientific or even just astronomical terminology right. And we do, because the shows were good. Well, what, 7, 8 episodes? There were definitely good ones. I mean, City on the Edge of Forever, Balance of Terror, Space Seed. Then you have Spock's Brain, which is kind of fun. Fun story. Spock's Brain was maybe the second or third episode of TOS I ever saw. Yeah, it's a wonder I kept watching. I legitimately liked Enterprise Incident. That was a good season 3, Tholian Web. But then, yeah, you had the one that even the space hippie one, and then of course the series finale, Turnabout Intruder. Kind of cracks me up when people think these are the Voyages, maybe the worst finale. I think they're forgetting about that one. You know, it's hit or miss. I think Futurama made a really good joke about it. But yeah, this is the original shuttle. We saw it not just on the Enterprise, but we saw it going from Starbase. If people debate it goes to warp, we literally see it in warp in the Menagerie Part 1. But no, I mean, Eagle Moss did a really good job with it. It's such a classic look now. Of course, back then, it was all new. Some people loved it, some people didn't. And of course, it had to be boxy so they could build it out of wood and other materials. Very small little windows there. And of course, in TOS, we had very few models. You only had the Constitution class model for a Federation ship, which they used it to replicate other ships, like in the M5 computer attack on all the others, the Defiant and Tholian Web. But with the remaster, they added quite a few ships replacing balls of white light. And this isn't one of them. It's actually, I think, in the last shuttle pack. The last one was actually Alien Shuttles, but the last one was Starfleet. This was actually from Season 5 of All Things DS9, when they went back in time to the Treble of Tribbles. And this is Cyrano Jones's ship, which is classified as a scout. This obviously was warp capable, which is kind of funny because it has no warp nacelles. It has a big old booster in the back. I would believe this would be less warp capable than the Class F, but I think it's a neat design. So that added to the universe some. Yeah, we didn't have a lot of Starfleet ships back then. I think it's interesting. They made this kind of small, but it's actually very heavy die cast with just the landing pads, polymer, and the bell. And they did finally add some other Starfleet ships. I think the Orion ship from Remaster. The acting in the original series is very good, but it's also very theatrical, very Shakespearean of its time. And we remember the highlights, Spock and Kirk, but I'm going to be honest, some of the guest stars and some of like the red shirt acting, and even Chekhov's original acting, I love Walter Koenig. I think he was awesome in Babylon 5, especially when he came into his own. But his first season of acting was ham, but in a good way. It was good ham. It was good ham. But again, we all grew up with it, and it shaped our childhood. And again, it forms those memories. I remember watching late on Sunday nights, one of the TV channels would air TOS. Yeah, a lot of good memories with friends with it, just, playing in the background as we did other things. They might have played games, had models of the Enterprise and stuff. But before Eagle Moss and in the modern era, it was really hard to get more than just your base ships. They just didn't have companies that appealed to that. Let's move into the movies, which was what was going on when I was a kid. I remember the first time I saw Wrath of Khan. It was on HBO. And the first time I saw TMP was actually at a friend's house. And that reminds me of the little transport pod here. I think it's really neat that they did the docking and stuff. The motion picture really added to the universe. And I liked its slow nature. It's definitely not my favorite film, but I watched it quite regularly. For a birthday, when they were all out, a family member bought me the 6-film box set at Sam's Club. And we would usually, again, when friends would come over, we would just pick a Star Trek film to put on. We also had the Stargate film in rotation when that was out, and the Star Wars films too. So, it was kind of a sci-fi rotation. But a lot of times one of the Star Trek films would come out. And yeah, we would put on the motion picture because it was a good long film to put on. And yeah, why not? It has something to be, good ambiance to it. But the travel pod was pretty neat. Very practical, space transport, showing that they don't just use transporters. I mean, I'm going to be honest, I wouldn't want my molecules scrabbled all over the universe either. I still kind of wonder if the transporter wasn't a death machine because, yeah, it makes more sense that you're copying someone and killing the original versus somehow magically transporting them through the ether. But Eagle Moss did these. But the one from the films that we all know and love came with the film we all know and love, Star Trek V, the Galileo 5 here, the updated version. Look, I don't hate 5. A lot of people do. I mean, inappropriate comedy, probably a little bit of contemporary language for the late 80s. Definitely some boomer language going on there with the bourbon and beans comments and, the physics of Kirk falling off a mountain and being caught by his legs and ankles by Spock in a jet belt. Even if he could catch him, he would rip his legs out of their sockets. But we forgive it. Not to mention the Klingons just being shoehorned in there. But the Galileo 5, I think, is one of the coolest designs. This really established the shuttlecraft. It was supposed to be around 9 meters, so a little bit bigger than before. Again, very clearly warp nacelles. I remember having a model of the Enterprise A as a kid, and it had a tiny version of this shuttle you could put together with it. It was much smaller than this, probably a third the size. But that was really neat. That's the only version of this I had as a little kid. So I think when Eagle Moss finally released this, we were all happy. And what's funny is they did one very similar to it over here. Where did I put it? Little package here. Riveting, I know. Blind guy reaching around in a box. There you go. They did a very similar version that was featured in Star Trek Generations. I believe it was the Hawking. It's basically the same exact model. It just has the slightly updated next generation side windows. I'm going to be honest, I think that actually helps. I mean, this one's a really neat look, but without any side view, it makes sense. I often like to think of this as the Class G, or maybe the Type 4, just to kind of get the type thing started, especially since we know this was still in service by Next Generation. So we could think of it as a Type 5, maybe. And I remember going to Generations in the theater. I enjoyed it. I think we were all disappointed, not in Kirk's death. I know there's a lot of critique about his last words being, "oh my," and even he's critiqued his delivery. I actually thought it was perfect. It's not saying something directly, but it's saying, I think we all know it says something, and we can, I thought it was great final words. It honestly sounded like Kirk was actually going off on his true final adventure. And he definitely didn't seem scared or bored with it or over it. It was good to see him. I think, again, we were all disappointed the two crews didn't get to mingle. I think some younger viewers wonder why Leonard Nimoy or DeForest Kelley weren't there. Well, DeForest Kelley could not be in the film for legal and, frankly, health reasons. Sad, but, we lost him so early on. Leonard Nimoy, I don't blame him. He'd done Spock. He just did a spot in Next Generation without a big role in the film. Yeah, Scotty was good. I mean, James Doohan, quite a character. But yeah, it's really cool that Eagle Moss did this. I don't know if anyone else outside of like a custom thing has ever done this variant, but since it's one of our favorite shuttles, why wouldn't you? No, I think Generations is a lot more appreciated now. Look, things like First Contact. I want to be honest, I don't hate any of the Next Generation films. I know they're not perfect. I know a lot of the crew doesn't get much to do in them. That's just the sad fact of the films. To be fair, though, if we're really being honest, how much did the crew of the original Enterprise get to do outside of a few episodes or a few here? I mean, it was mostly Kirk, McCoy, Spock. Scotty got a little bit more, but like Sulu, Uhura, they didn't get a ton to do. Not to mention, it was almost like they were just hired for the diversity. It's like, okay, we have a black individual on the bridge. We have an Asian individual on the bridge. What do we do with them? I don't know. They're there. That's what matters, right? It was mostly just about the main three with Scotty getting a little more because, again, such a character. And that was, the original series, the motion picture continuation. And, of course, their big successful film was very much Save the Whales. And that was everywhere. I remember there was one movie store in town that had no Star Trek films, not really any sci-fi at all, except they did have Star Trek 4, because everyone had Star Trek 4. And that's actually what allowed for Next Generation to get going in 85, 86, and go on the air in 87. With that, let's move into Next Generation and the original shuttle from that show, the Type 7. This was a medium range, kind of medium class shuttle meant for longer duration voyages. It had 2, maybe 3 internal compartments. And it was designed to kind of look similar to the Galaxy class with its rounded edges. So in space, the model shots, yeah, it could match up and everything. Problem was trying to make all the curvy surfaces out of plywood, styrofoam, and whatever else they used. It never did mesh up well, like the model, the prop that the actors interacted with in the shuttle. But again, we forgave it because we knew it was a TV budget, and frankly, the budget and the effects were better for TNG. Plus, they were making 26 episodes a year. That's one episode on average every 2 years, of course. I mean, 2 years, 2 weeks. But, of course, they had seasons and stuff. But, yeah, you understood it. I actually really like this design, at least the, space model. And the idea that, yeah, Galaxy class is going to need a lot of shuttles. I mean, heck, it had 3 shuttle bays. The one large one on the saucer and then the 2 on the gooseneck. Again, though, the old trope of if you're in a shuttle, you're probably going to crash. Yeah, the Type 7. And this was really the only one we saw for Season 1, I do believe. By Season 2, we had the Type 15, not shuttlecraft, but shuttle pod. Whereas something like the Type 7 typically would have a crew of 2, although 1 could fly it, and then 6 passengers, maybe fewer on a long range, maybe a little more for short range. And of course, this was warp capable. Typically, warp 3, warp 4 was what shuttles were doing by the time of Next Generation. Well, the shuttle pod was not that. Okay, this is the one time I will say these are not warp nacelles. These are very clearly impulse nacelles because you see openings in the back for thrust, plus there's really nowhere here for impulse to do. And these were just, yeah, sublight to go from ship to ship, ship to surface of a planet, ship to station. And typically they just had one person, maybe two, at most four on board, but usually it's just one or two people on board plus some cargo in the back. Much smaller, just 3 or 4 meters long. And they did this so they would have a prop, a model that the actors can interact with. It still has a little bit of elegance going on, but you can see it's much bulkier, much boxier than the 7. I remember it from the, was it Times Squared episode? I believe the one where there's the Out of Time Picard, there's the 2 Picards. Not really one of my favorite episodes. I can't tell you why I never cared for that episode, but something in the way Picard acted just wasn't my favorite. But again, the nice thing was you had 26 episodes a year, and they came out every year without fail. So the clunkers, or at least even the ones you just personally didn't like, that's fine. Wait another couple episodes. I liked season 2 of Next Generation. Where Silence Has Lease, I actually enjoyed that one quite a bit. Of course, everyone likes Q-Who. But, of course, meeting Kalar was good. When Riker was on the Klingon ships were quite good. Then you also have episodes like The Outrageous Akana and whatnot. I'm not good with the episode titles. I've seen them ad nauseum, but guess what? When you can't see the title flash up on the screen, it doesn't embed itself in your brain as well. So usually I will just, oh yeah, that one. But, of course, the season closer, Shades of Grey, probably the worst season ender in all of Star Trek. I think we can kind of go with that. Certainly the most wasted potential. Anyway, the shuttle pod, short range, short haul missions. But then in season 5, we get the minivan in space, which is ironically about the time minivans were getting popular. Yeah, the Type 6 shuttle, which is considered a short to medium range. It's in between the two. It is warp capable, but it's not meant for long-range missions. It doesn't have compartments. There's just the rear section for 4, maybe 6 if you pack them in, passengers, and then the forward seat for 1. These are definitely warp nacelles. Here's the impulse manifolds. There you go. This was the quintessential shuttle for the rest of TNG and would appear in other Star Trek. And it was done so they could have a prop that they could interact with in person, and then the space model would look the same. Love it or hate it. I remember the old Playmates version of this for the figures they did. What were those? Like 5-inch figures? They weren't 6-inch scale, but they weren't G.I. Joe small. I remember that clearly. This is, yeah, the shuttle. A little bit memed on. I like it, but I don't love it. It's a perfectly adequate design, but I don't know that anyone looked at this and thought, cool. There was something a little conservative about some of the TNG choices like this. They didn't do a lot of bold decisions, certainly not after season 1. People really forget how different TNG season 1, where Roddenberry was more involved. I mean, I remember they even tried to say the humans were all vegetarians by the 24th century. Okay. But they kind of smoothed out those edges by that point. But still, they tackled a lot of social issues. Although I don't know if they were quite as bold about it as the original series was. They were, I know today, very tame, but for the 1960s, and even for the late 80s, early 90s, TNG did some stuff too. More than we realize today. But I do think some of the stuff was a little conservative because it had to be on the budget. I'm thinking of like some alien makeup, some of the props. They had a lot of reuse of bridges, and you didn't see a lot of. It was always funny how aliens are perfectly willing, even captains and presidents were willing to beam on board the Enterprise as opposed to having the humans come onto their ship. Of course, the real explanation was they couldn't or just didn't have the budget to build a set. But they had this shuttle. To be fair, Droidy didn't crash his in season 4. He was just abducted by a Romulan warbird and programmed to do assassinations, but he didn't crash it. He remembers going to Risa. He had a great time. And another one that Eagle Moss did that probably no one else would have is the Type 9A shuttle. And if you don't recognize this, that's fine. I don't believe it was ever seen, at least not in the original shows, but it was always in the Star Trek tech manual. I remember it very clearly. This is a cargo shuttle, a heavy transport shuttle. It's about 10 meters. It could carry a large number of people in a rear bay. There was a bulkhead here. Or it could carry several tons of cargo or supplies. These were used for construction and all that. So I think it was neat that they did it, even though it was never in the show. But it was in the manuals, and it makes sense. You know, you had your smallest tier on the Enterprise. You could have a lot of these. Then you had your medium. Then you had the medium to kind of long range. And then you had your heavy lift or long range here. It gives them a nice assortment. And of course the D had work bees, little outside zoomy pods, basically just bigger than a spacesuit. We saw these in the motion pictures, and they would carry over, and Eagle Moss doing these. I believe it was one of the first times they did a clear, a transparent canopy. What a neat idea, and absolutely something sub-impulse, really, this thruster craft for inspection, repair. You would want that. You'd want to put eyes on things. It's one thing to have drones, but human. And this was seen on screen. And they even did this one towards the end. The Phoenix Work Pod, which is kind of a larger version. Room for two, and it has basically a work truck in space. Kind of reminds me of an El Camino with the curvy front and just the open bed in the back. But this would be more for construction or heavy work duty. And it's said that actually the Type 9A could carry one Phoenix work pod in its rear for deploying. These are supposed to be little manipulator clamps. Like the Type 9A, this was in the concept artwork. Probably Andrew Probert worked on them. It was never featured officially, but it was so much in tech manuals. And I think it's really cool to have a big brother to the work bee, because it, again, would make perfect sense. And something like a Galaxy class would have plenty of room on board. By the way, the Enterprise, it was big. I know it doesn't seem like it, but 42 decks, nearly 650 meters long, that actually translates to a lot of space. More than you probably realize. You think, oh, there's 1,000 people on board. Trust me, there could be a lot more on board. But why not? You know, it's not like it cost them anything, because it's the future. Communist as it might kind of seem, with no money. That might have been a little bit retconned as we move on to later shows, but Gene Roddenberry was pretty adamant that it was a post-scarcity economy, so yeah, money wasn't a thing. But definitely wouldn't call him a pinko or a commie in real life, because, you know, World War II veteran and police officer, but he was Gene. Yeah, he was Gene. Eagle Monster's really good about doing obscure but cool stuff like this. At least I thought so. By the way, these shuttles, they didn't sell them individually or just outright. You had to buy them in sets of 4, and they were kind of special order. All right, let me put up some of these before the cats decide there's something to play with and talk about the first spinoff. And I remember when it came out and a friend was trying to tell me about it, and I wasn't really getting it. He's like, "Oh, it's Star Trek. Oh, Next Generation, all that." No, it's a different show, but it's in the same universe. I know today that's not at all radical or uncommon. Back then, while I wouldn't say it was unheard of, it was pretty unique. That didn't happen very frequently, where you had a spin-off of a show that would come out while the first show was still on air. Usually if you had a spin-off, it would come out later, and then if it worked, but yeah, when Deep Space Nine was announced, it would come around. It was announced in '92, was out by '93. The first season, we didn't know what to think about it. When it did come out, we didn't get shuttles, we had runabouts. But then with season 3, we got the Defiant, and I remember that was in magazines. It was a big push, and that was an interesting season because that's right after TNG had gone off the air. Season 3 was that after 1 and 2 ran with the Next Generation. And we saw the Defiant had these Type 18 shuttle pods again, which seemingly are warp capable. At least they have little things there, and in the search we see them limping their way back home. Impulse would never do it. They were very small inside, probably only able to hold 4, maybe 5 people. And the Defiant, being a small ship, only could carry a couple of these. This came out in one of the later sets. I don't recall which one. And I was really tickled to get it. I was kind of wanted this one. Mostly because I was curious what it looked like. Even though it is a pod, it's very different from the Type 15. And you can tell that the construction material and everything, they were finally able to do more rounded edges and whatnot. I don't know. Of course, when Deep Space Nine came out, I don't remember anyone caring that the commander was black. The commander was Hawk. That's all I remember hearing. I think Oda was always a favorite Quark. To be fair, I think a lot of people wanted to love her, but the first season, Dax especially, was quite wooden. Yeah, it took a little time. Kira took a little time to warm up to me too, but that happened pretty quickly. And then, of course, we got Garrick, who I think taught us all what gay coding was, frankly. I mean, he was, yeah, in a good way, frankly. Oh, Garrick. And Ducat. If we had known with season 1 what Ducat would have been, heck, there were times in Deep Space Nine where it looked like he might even be an ally. And for a minute there in season 4 with the Klingons, I guess, yeah, he was. But when he turned back for the Dominion, even he said it kind of just felt right. We did finally get a true shuttle for the Defiant later on, the Type 10 here, the Chaffee. It was not used very much, and it's essentially an update of like the Type 7. It's a longer but more narrow hull. It has Defiant-style warp nacelles. It's like the Defiant. It has armor, a protected computer core. It has a micro-photon launcher, phasers, but it can only carry 1. I'm not even sure it really attached, but we do see it in use. Neat design. It's simple, but in a good way. Kind of looks like a speedboat, a race boat. It's a shame because of reasons they weren't able to use it more. They were still using a lot of practical models at this time. And it didn't crash. I was trying to think in the episode. No, we didn't lose it. But this is a really neat one, and I believe this came out pretty early on in the Eagle Moss collection. Is that all we have from Deep Space Nine? It might be. And Deep Space Nine was only on the air by itself for half a season. But in the middle of its third season, we got Voyager. And it sounded interesting. A ship lost across the galaxy in the Delta Quadrant. Yes, from the beginning, we realized the Borg were from the Delta Quadrant. Maquis on board, Starfleet. A lot of interesting ideas there. Female captain, it's Mrs. Colombo. Also, she was in Cheers. I certainly didn't care. I didn't hear any of my friends caring. I mean, she seemed to fit the role well. She was a credible leader, so why not? Had a lot of expectations. Oh, and I had the guy from the first duty who apparently wasn't the guy from the first duty. That was slightly confusing. A new starship, which started the trend. It had a little bit of old, a little bit of new. And it had this shuttle here, the Type 8. Which is essentially a Type 6, slightly reworked and streamlined, was updated Intrepid style nacelles. So pretty much all the specs that would apply. And that's what they used. And oh boy, did Voyager use shuttles. For season 1, and really 2, they tried. They tried to keep an accounting of the crew, how many were living and dead, how many photon torpedoes they had, how much dilithium, or how many gel packs. The Intrepid was a relatively small ship, 141 crew originally. At least they were smart enough not to tell us how many came from the Maquis ship, the Bajoon, but it could not have been that many. They gave up on the premise. They ended up with the just infinite shuttle glitch in their small shuttle bay. Realistically, the Intrepid should have just carried a handful of Type 8 shuttles. They really took that. You're in a shuttle, you're going to crash to the next level. They also did it with their crew. I'm sure on the internet someone's added up how many crew were lost that we know. I don't know. The crew would go up. They would have 129 at one point, then 150. I get that they added a few, but it was just all over the place. There was no consistency. And unfortunately, again, while some characters did get time, the Doctor, I really enjoyed how much more time he would get and how he would grow. It's almost like we should put him in a new show. Of course, 7 of 9 got it. And I'm not even going to say it was because of her looks. I'm sure they were. But, she had an intriguing plot and was an interesting actress. So why not? And, Captain Janeway, Tuvix, she had their own thing. But Paris got some. Torres got a little bit. But, of course, Kim, I don't know. And it's a shame they didn't have more reoccurring characters like DS9. You had Vorik and a few others, a little bit. Voyager, it had so much potential. But I feel like it fell in an awkward area in between TNG and DS9. Like it wanted to be like TNG, but it never got quite as deep. On the other hand, it never got serialized like DS9. Luckily, they didn't have to just stick to a slightly readjust Type 6 for long, though. They got their Type 9, sometimes called a Class 2 shuttle, which apparently was on board the whole time. They just didn't use it. A very long shuttle, but only could carry 3 or 4 people. It was fast. It seemed like something designed for speed and scouting, but not for transport. And many have said that it's actually too small if you adjust it for scale for anyone to stand up inside it. This looks like a sports car, which is probably not terribly useful if you're lost in the Delta Quadrant. But these two, don't worry, got the infinite shuttle glitch. So we had 2 shuttle types on board. And if that wasn't enough in season 5, they just built one from scratch. Design and everything. Yeah, the Delta Flyer. From scratch. Worked fine. They have the resources. And when it got destroyed at the end of season 6, beginning of season 7, they built another one in no time off screen. What was their secret? They went from limited resources to having more resources than the freaking Galaxy class. But you know what? I knew people who liked Voyager, and no shade on them, more than Deep Space Nine. It did appeal to that next generation crew. And to be fair, those of us who liked Deep Space Nine back then, we liked it. But it's only in more recent times with the internet and kind of binge watching and looking back that it's really, really gained the acclaim it so richly deserves. I don't think it had near as many stinkers as Next Generation, even though it had a slightly fewer episodes, but virtually the same. And it had a lot of powerful episodes. A lot of the stuff about race too, using Captain Sisko. The one with Vic and him talking about how black singers weren't allowed to do so many things in Vegas. Very good. Far Beyond the Stars. Really good episode. It did take me a little bit to warm up to Avery Brooks's dramatic acting, but once I did, I liked it. What was the name of the one where they went back to 2024 in the sanctuary districts? Future, past, present, 1 and 2. That was a little bit fortuitous, I would say. I think they had tackled a lot of issues like that more head on. They had more balls. Deep Space Nine had a lot more adventurous nature to attack sexuality, to go at race and political things. A lot was said with the Dominion. Of course, the Jim Hadar. Political machinations with the Klingons, the Cardassians. Yeah, it was a lot more nuanced. If Next Generation sometimes played it a little too safe and was always happy to hit the reset button, Deep Space Nine wasn't. They had to live with the consequences. And they did bring back money a little bit because of Quark and the Ferengi. Also good food cooking. Any episode with Sisko cooking always made me hungry because I love Cajun food, griot food. I grew up near it. But then we get back to Voyager, and it started off like that. But by season really 5, 6, 7, the last ones, there's a little bit of carryover, but they dialed it back significantly, and it really felt like it was no big deal. And it was a shame they completely dropped the whole Maquis thing at all. I'm not saying they had to be at loggerheads. I didn't want melodrama. But, oh well, we focused on the positives. It was just to shut your brain off a lot of times and enjoy it. In that way, when it did have a really good, deep episode, like, say, Living Witness, it all the more. You kind of expected DS9 and Next Generation to say something profound. So when they didn't, you were a little bit left there. With Voyager, at least for me, I didn't expect a whole lot, so when it did give me something, I was pretty dang happy with it. And while they had a bigger VFX budget and more models, digital and practical, they weren't opposed to some reuse and redress. Also in the Eagle Moss, you had Janeway's shuttle, the armored one here, which really is just a reworked Type 9. You can see it when you look. It's a pretty heavy one, though. Not my little favorite thing. Oh, their whole future thing. Them and time travel. Endgame. I really like the finales for TNG and Deep Space Nine. The last episode for Voyager was fine. It wasn't offensive. And I think that's just it. Voyager often just was mediocre. It's a shame because there was so much storytelling potential if they were willing to do that. I think we all know what it could have been was realized just a few years later with the reimagined Battlestar Galactica, though. Before we move on, fun story. I remember when Voyager first came out, and it would where I was at. It came on after DS9 Saturday nights. I think DS9 was 10:30 or 11, and Voyager was 11:30 or 12. And you ever know when you're going to be getting sick the next day? Like, you feel fine right now, but you know you're going to be sick. I used to get that when I get the stomach flu. About once a year, I get the stomach flu when I was a kid. And I remember eating Reese's peanut butter cups and watching the episode where they contact the Romulan science ship, but it turns out to be in the past. I remember watching it in there. Basically, I woke up the next morning at like 5 a.m., throwing my guts up, Reese's peanut butter cups everywhere. It took me years to want to eat them after that, and I still remember Voyager. So basically, Janeway killed Tuvix. Janeway also made me throw up Reese's peanut butter cups, and I freaking love peanut butter, so that just sucked. Thanks, Janeway. Thank you. Anyway, Voyager went off the air in 2001, and that really should have been the end for a while. They had done 21 seasons, 7, with 26 or close to it episodes per season since 1987. Just to say 15 years when you consider. It was feeling tired. The tropes get a little bit worn thin. You could tell the writers were exhausted. But they pushed for and got Enterprise. I went there. In fact, that was my first experience with Enterprise. It wasn't at first known as Star Trek Enterprise. Yeah, the promos on TV played that song from The Calling. Contemporary music of the early 2000s. And of course, it went more with the theme song, the intro song, instead of a classic instrumental. And then they went further with the decon chamber, where young people rub glittery jelly on themselves. And as a friend who actually is gay happened to mention to me, since 7 of 9 worked out so well, they put 2 big bosomed women in the show. Yeah, it was pretty clear the Enterprise was trying to get a younger, titillated audience and do all that. And it was a prequel, which in 2001 was kind of the thing. This was, right after Phantom Menace and all that stuff. Prequels were in vogue. It wasn't looking too promising. But you know what? When it first premiered September, I watched it, and hot take, I really like Star Trek Enterprise. And I think it never should have been cut short at season 4, because it really had hit its stride. And there's nothing new there. The first 2 seasons of Next Generation, even though I think, there are good episodes there, yeah, it's a good thing. And even season 3, it got good and had some good episodes, but it wasn't until season 4 that I really felt like TNG hit its stride. Deep Space Nine, while its first season wasn't bad and actually had some really good episodes like Duet, it was kind of flat, kind of vanilla, kind of samey. They didn't really know what they were doing. Voyager was kind of the reverse. It started off pretty strong, but then, like I said, lost the plot. Luckily, though, Deep Space Nine in season 4 got Worf. I mean, season 3 was already a great improvement to many. 4, you got Worf and things happen. With Voyager, I think most would agree adding 7 of 9 was the right decision. My point is, right as all the other shows were getting good, Enterprise was too. Season 3 was better, more original, and season 4, I think, was the prequel we all wanted. The problems with seasons 1 and 2, they weren't bad, especially on rewatch. They're really not. They're well acted, the atmosphere is good. I love the future NASA ambiance. Anyone who knows me knows I like real world space travel and the history of Mercury, Gemini, Apollo, all that. So I like that they were doing that retro futuristic vibe. Even though I don't know about making a prequel, I get what they're trying to do. Like I said, they had done 21 seasons all set in the late 24th century. You did need to change it up. Personally, I would have gone ahead to the 25th or 26th century, but they went back. And most importantly, they got Sam Beckett to be captain. I fucking love Quantum Leap. And yeah, if you get Scott Bakula in there, you already got me hooked. What a talented individual. And he just seems like a super nice, chill dude. Honestly, a quintessential Boy Scout, which might seem a little cheesy later on, but if you think of NASA types, yeah, I could see Scott Bakula, in a different world, being an astronaut and a test pilot of that type. Not quite as daredevil-y. And I do have some problems with how Archer was written, but that wasn't Bakula's fault. He did the best he could with that character, and he wasn't bad. And you could definitely tell they were going for a less evolved human. Trip was good. T'Pol, really good, honestly. I think at first, hard to find her feet, but the episode where she actually told Trip her age, that was honest to good melodrama. Like, their relationship was believable, and I liked it. They didn't have that feeling of being forced. Star Trek is known for not doing great romance. B'Elanna and Paris is another one. That was very organic and believable. I hate to say it, but Troy and Riker, while I'm glad they did end up together, I didn't quite feel the same chemistry there. They wasn't horrible. Anyway, I digress. Unfortunately, Reed didn't get as much to do, but that's okay. He was actually well built as just a background character. I like Phlox. So there was more going on than I think with Voyager, but of course you have to have at least the obligatory Harry Kim, or in this case, Travis Mayweather. To be fair, though, I don't know what more they could have done. There wasn't a whole lot there. He was a boomer. No, not modern boomer, but space boomer. It's a thing. I just feel like there wasn't... I don't know. And that's not against the actor. He did fine. But he wasn't standoutish. But then again, if you're kind of going for future NASA, works. Anyway, let's talk about the shuttle pod. And for Enterprise, shuttle pods are actually very important. Heck, Shuttle Pod 1 was one of their best episodes early on. Early days, this is how they would primarily get to and from planets. I just wish they didn't have a transporter. Now, from what I understand, it was actually the studio that mandated they have a transporter on board. And there we go, studio interference. Well, I think one reason DS9 turned out so well is it had less interference than Voyager. And Voyager, because of studio interference, I don't know. Anyway, but they had a transporter, but at least they tried to lean on the shuttle pods. They at least did their best to ignore the transporter as often as they could. And that was always going to be a challenge for them. It's how do you make a show made 30 years, even 35 years after TOS that's supposed to be 100 years before TOS. Same thing with, the Star Wars prequels versus the originals. At some point, you just have to have suspension of disbelief. To be fair, though, too, our technology today, if they tried to make it look less futuristic than 1966 TOS, it would be behind our technology, because one area that most sci-fi writers just could not have predicted the growth, computers and the internet in particular. And these days, AI, I mean, that's going to be something that ultimately dates. My point is, the shuttle pod was important to the show, so we got to see a lot of it. And it's not that big. It says it's like 6 meters, but it feels like it should be a little bigger. It held up to 6. It was 1/4 impulse. Had these folding winglets, which makes sense for this. And I like it. They went chunky enough, but it does look retro. And it has a little bit of space shuttle going on. And I'm not ashamed to admit, I love the starship designs in Enterprise. Not just the Starfleet ones, which I really do. That when, I'll be honest, the reason I started getting in and did the Eagle Launch collection is when I saw they did the Enterprise ships. I show aside, really like the designs. And not just the Starfleet, like I said, the Klingon. I really like the Klingon fleet a lot. For one thing, I think it's cool, but I got so tired of the bird of prey. Even though there is a bird of prey in Enterprise, it's not that one. Now, it's unforgivable that they used the Katinga. What was it, like the 4th or 5th episode? But I understand they knew. In my head canon, I just plug in the D4. And luckily, Eagle Moss gave us a D4, which is really awesome. That should have been there. But again, the VFX people, everyone's exhausted. They just got off Voyager and all that. They ran out of time after doing a lot of hard work on the pilot. And by the way, Broken Bow, it cracks me up when people say Broken Bow. I live near Broken Bow, Oklahoma. It's Broken Bow. But anyway, it was a pretty good pilot. I actually think the pilots got better. I think no argument that Encounter at Farpoint, it was not a good episode. It wasn't the worst thing ever, but it was pretty weak. Good thing we didn't just... And, of course, then you had The Naked Now. The first couple of things... Oh, and what's the one with the black people? Yeah, that one came early. It's really good we didn't judge TNG on the first 10, 12 episodes. Oh, what was the Wesley one? Oh, the bow shall break. Oh, my God. Oh, yeah. Anyway, I'm going to get out of my own head on that. DS9, the pilot was really good. I thought some of the acting was a little meh, but it was pretty good. Caretaker for Voyager, I think it had better acting, and it started off pretty strong and pretty intriguing for the establishment of what they're going on. And the same goes for Enterprise. Even though I'm not a big fan of prequels, I was interested to see what they would do with the early days of exploration. I wish they had not stuck so much to the tropes in season 1 and 2, but there were good episodes, and I'll give them credit. They did the best Borg episode in a very long time, and they actually fit it in pretty well. Of course, I remember even from the beginning, there were a lot of people that were very upset and concerned about canon and the technology and just everything not lining up, violating all this and that. Prequels are always going to do that. And then, of course, you get season 3 in the Xindi arc. It was good. It was going back to serialized TV. Not the best thing ever, but I enjoyed it. But then you get to season 4. And I love that compromise of serialized and episodic. I think doing 2 to 4 part mini arcs and then maybe just a one-parter now and again just to break things up, I love that compromise. I'm not the biggest fan of season-long arcs. It just too much rides on the conclusion, and it's too drawn out. It's like you get blue-balled by it a little too much. But 3 episodes, maybe 4. That's pretty good. I don't know. So and of course there was more Shran in season 4, and more Shran is always good. I like the Vulcan stuff. The Mirror Universe episodes, that was great. And then of course you come to These Are the Voyages. I was really hoping it would be like the season finale for Babylon 5 season 4, where it wasn't the end. It could have been, they flipped it around. And I think they were too. I think because Babylon 5 got a fifth season, Andromeda, hell, even Earth Final Conflict got a fifth season. If you know what that is, deep cut. Also, if you think modern TV shows are, trust me, we had some interesting choices back in the 90s and early 2000s too. I do believe that the Enterprise folks were hoping that Sci-Fi or someone would pick them up. I think we all were, but alas, it just wasn't to happen. And I think everyone was just tired of Star Trek at this point. The viewership was down. The internet had not really popularized things, and you didn't have the next generation, no pun intended, of viewers coming up that liked Enterprise. I was an adult when it came out, a young adult. I was in college, but an adult. But a lot of kids grew up with it and enjoyed it, and I get it. I think it had heart behind it, and I like the cast, the crew. But I also understand why after that time, 20 years of producing Star Trek, and it's not even counting the films before it, if they'd only waited a couple of years, but they didn't. By the way, I'm just holding the shuttle pod because that's what we have out of the set. That was the main shuttle. When Eagle Moss released this, I think everyone was really excited. And it's almost a full-size ship. And it's very heavy die-cast. They did a banger job here. And of course, at the same time Enterprise was going on, we also had the 4th Next Generation movie. So Generations came out in 94. We already looked at the Hawking from that. First Contact, 96. I saw that in the theater. Really enjoyed it. That was great. The beginning battle, the cameo of the Doctor in it. Hell, even the background mention of the Bozeman. Yep, I got it. Zephyr Cochrane, he's a really great actor, or was. Watching the Earth be destroyed after World War III is a cautionary tale. I mean, honest to God, as much as it's starting to feel like maybe they were onto something with World War III coming in the 2030s, 2040s. Anyway, what was I saying? Anyway, there wasn't a shuttle in First Contact, but there was for Insurrection. The Type 11 here. That was 1999. And Insurrection is often accused of feeling like a long TNG episode. A 2-parter, maybe. I completely agree. And I think that's a compliment. It's fine. I really like Insurrection. I think it's aged well. I think people look back on it fondly because you do get more character moments in it than you do in the other films. Of course, Data's in it. He has a little bit of stuff like him working as a flotation device is a little too humorous for my take, and him with the kids, a little too much humor there. But I get it after First Contact. They wanted to do something fun. And it is a fun film. And it's not earth-shatteringly serious, the consequences. And it's definitely a morality play about the lives of just 600 people and all of that. Not to mention the face-stretching scene of the Admiral. Maybe I was a little underwhelmed when I first saw it in the theaters. But, again, upon rewatch, and of course this is from the scene with Data. The Type 11 shuttle was the largest yet the Enterprise had carried at 16 meters. It's really like a somewhat scaled down runabout, and you can see some DNA it has in common with the Type 9 from the Intrepid. meant to be fast and have good weaponry, which after the Dominion War makes sense. It also has a bottom docking port for reasons. Not sure why. If it were any larger, by the way, a runabout's not considered a shuttle. It's about 24 meters. The runabout is actually a small ship, a scout ship type. This is still a shuttle, but it's about as big as a shuttle, at least one stationed on a starship can get. And it's nice to see a more capable shuttlecraft on the Enterprise. And I think it looks really good. It fits in. I like the angled hull. Of course, now we're using digital models so they can do that more. No, Insurrection's a good film. Not amazing, but not all films need to be. It honestly seems, I know this is going to be a hot take, it almost reminds me of Star Trek 4, which I know is beloved. But after a serious movie in Star Trek 3, which I actually like quite a bit, I think Insurrection is trying to be fun and adventurous like Star Trek 4. Maybe some would say they missed the mark a little bit, but still, I see a lot in common. I was almost going to say it's like Star Trek 5, but look, I admit there are problems with 5, but I probably enjoy it more than a lot of people do as well. But then we get Nemesis. And for that film, which was actually an early outing for Tom Hardy, we have the Type 17 shuttle, which is kind of a replacement for the Type 9A. It's a heavy, long-range cargo shuttle that had the Argo in it. I'm not going to say Nemesis isn't a great film. I think it had potential, but a lot of the character scenes were cut out that really should have been in there. That said, even though you can't argue that it wasn't a financial flop, I don't think it was just god-awful without redemption. Definitely the weakest of the 4 TNG films, no argument there. But nowhere near as bad as Star Trek 5. But yeah, this was the shuttle that brought the dune buggy to that planet where they found B4. That's a whole thing in and of itself. It's got the little winglets. There, you can definitely see a little bit of Enterprise shuttle pod in here. Maybe because they were trying to get Enterprise. But that was 2002, so Enterprise was pretty new. It's cool to have the Romulans. I really liked having the Valdor. That was another one when Eagle Moss first released it that I was really excited to get. And I like that it opened the door to the Romulan Empire and all that. Shinjin and all that stuff. By the way, my friends and I always called the scimitar the scimitar. I don't know why. You know, the Uber weapon ship. And I'm going to be frank. I don't like the look of the scimitar. I don't absolutely hate it, but I don't like it. Oh well. Not the worst thing ever. Not the worst thing ever. But had issues. Kind of like with Enterprise, though. I think at this point, we're on the 10th Star Trek film. They had been putting them out with great frequency for 23 years at this point. Times were changing. And especially the next generation, as they're getting older. You know, at least with the original cast, they were allowed to kind of age and not be forced into action star roles. I'm not going to say they didn't have any action in Star Trek 4, 5, 6, but they tried to make not just the next generation cast, but Patrick Stewart himself, action hero. Starting with First Contact and then, of course, Nemesis and all that too. Kind of an ill fit. And there just wasn't a lot of room in Nemesis for character moments. There could have been, but they cut them out. And I lament the film it could have been. Maybe one day we'll get a director's cut, kind of like with Blade Runner. But this ship's okay. It's not my favorite shuttle. I like the Type 11 more. But it's cool that Eagle Moss did it, and it's a big size too. Again, it's almost a full-size ship, even though it was in the shuttle packs. Plus, of course, with Nemesis, you get a cameo from Admiral Janeway. Is it a little weird that she now outranks Picard? No, because Kirk told Picard not to go for promotion. See, when he finally went for promotion, he got screwed. If he just listened to Kirk, maybe we could have avoided at least season 1 of Picard. But that was the end of the classic Star Trek era. For several years, there was nothing from early 2005 until 2009. But then, of course, we get old JJ. We had Star Trek 2009, which started off in the Academy a reboot. And there are things, I mean, for one thing, I like the soundtrack a lot. The ambiance was good. But what always bugged me, I saw it in the theater just as I've done the others, the fact that Kirk goes from kind of a juvenile delinquent academy, not even graduate yet, to freaking captain of the newest and bestest starship in the fleet in one film. I've said before, you need to suspend your disbelief. I'll just say this. I have a real hard time suspending my disbelief that much. Plus, while I feel like the actors did a perfectly good job, I feel like they kind of flanderized, I can't talk now, sorry, been talking a while, flanderized the characters. Especially Carl Irving doing Bones. It's a little just too much. Of course, the whole Kirk thing. Scotty was kind of fun. I don't know. And they definitely did their best to promote Uhura to the main cast, which she always was, but, you know, they tried to give her more lines. That's fine. I don't know. It was definitely a younger generation. You had Beastie Boys playing, all that stuff. Here's a shuttle, because Eagle Moss did a shuttle pack. This is the kind of academy shuttle they had. And you'll notice it's a little small. I don't know what it was that they used the VFX files to make these. Maybe it was just the scaling. But this whole pack kind of came off as a little tiny. The shuttle looks fine. In fact, I like a lot of the Starfleet ships we see in the show. The Kelvin's pretty cool looking. I like it. It's a shame that the one ship I don't really care for is the Enterprise herself. Kind of sad. Here's the medical shuttle from the Kelvin. I guess the one that Kirk's born on. And it looks good. It looks like an updated version, to some extent, of the Galileo. The Eagle Moss made a little error here. This little hollowed out port should be filled in. Oops. Don't really know how that happened. To be fair to them, they offered a free refund if people wanted it. A little bit of an oopsie on that. And there's actually a very similar shuttle. These are in packs of 4, all of them, by the way. Here. Find it. Dude. We have this one. And finally, we have this one here besides, which is kind of, they're both, to me, very similar to the first one. I mean, I know there are differences. I know they're from the films. And to be fair, the other shuttles, if you look at them, aren't that much different. I mean, this is really close to the medical shuttle, but this is a little bigger. And I would say this one, which is from Into Darkness, which is really meant to be the Galileo 7 type, it's probably the best. And yeah, In the Darkness, and this is not a hot take at all. In the Darkness is the weakest of the three films. Look, Benedict Cumberbatch is a perfectly good actor. Not as Khan though. Not as Khan. It just didn't fit. And his whole rage and things. I mean, it was so just trying to bring back Khan for the first time in their universe to get the credit. The reason Wrath of Khan worked is you had 3 seasons of the original series. Khan was from there. He came back. It was believable. My biggest problem, especially with that second movie, was they wanted you to feel something for the characters and feel connected to them. It didn't feel earned, just like Kirk's promotion. So much just, it felt like the characters were entitled to it. The nice thing about a series, especially when you have 24+ episodes in a year, time passes. You see them highs and lows, different. Yeah, it feels earned. And I really wish, I know they couldn't because they picked movie actors, but if they'd made 2009 as a film and then they had made a series from it, which I think if it had been done later, they might have done, because today series have as much prestige and all that and budgets as movies, even more so. I think that would have been okay if you made a movie to start them off and then go to a series, but just to go to another film. And then they weren't even able to do the films quickly, one every couple of years like before. What was In the Darkness, 2013? And then they rushed to get Beyond out in 2016, which most would agree was the best one. But then that was it. In a period of 7 years, they managed only 3 films. And that, you look back at the Bond films from the 60s, they were almost cranking out one a year at a point. If you're going to do that, if you want people to feel invested in these characters, you need to do that. But it's just, guys, I just wasn't a fan of the concept. Now, that said, there are fun scenes. I liked the original film for its ambiance and its actors, and it had some fun scenes. It was great seeing Leonard Nimoy come back. And Beyond was legitimately a pretty good film. The villain was just kind of weak sauce, but I love the callbacks to Enterprise because, again, I like Enterprise. The Franklin is a legitimately cool ship design. But In the Darkness just felt so wasted, predictable, bland, and the whole fake out death of Kirk, again, not earned. I didn't care. Just, then he got demoted again, then he was already back to being captain in 5 minutes. It was too quick. It was too J.J. Abrams. And by his own admission, he's more of a Star Wars than a Star Trek fan, and that's fine. So I thought, sure, yeah, well, once he gets to do a Star Wars film, it'll be great, right? Well, at least maybe one of his 2 wasn't too shabby. Ugh. Anyway, I don't know. That gets into more of my problems with modern day Hollywood and the whole cost of films these days. How they can't just make a film that'll appeal to an audience and have fun with it, spend a few million on it. I know now everything's got to make $1 billion and appeal to the widest audience possible. And I think that's where Star Trek started to lose out. It was always a niche thing. Don't get me wrong, very dedicated, very loyal fans, and there are a lot of us. But Star Wars is the more mass appeal popcorn film movie franchise. At least it was before they drove it into the ground. But for years, even the prequels, I went to go see Revenge of the Sith with my entire family. We knew the prequels were funny, but we still had fun with it. I remember standing in line for Phantom Menace with a friend. I had classes in the morning, but I had the afternoon. I didn't classes that afternoon, so me and a friend who also didn't have classes went and stood in line and got tickets for all of our friend group. Star Trek was never quite that, where you get everyone to go. It was more like I've started this video off talking about conventions and a small but dedicated and frankly supportive fan group and friend group. Here's a little space tug. Definitely a background ship that Eagle Moss did. And if these look like disposable razor blade handles and whatnot, yeah, when they built the original model for the background shots in TNG and stuff, they used that. Waste not, want not. Of course, a lot of the Wolf 359 ships had markers for nacelles. I don't know. It's McClunky, but Eagle Moss has done some really obscure background ships, and I love them for it. Here's a little air tram from the motion picture. Basically, a looks like a coffin, frankly, bus in space. You know, when TOS came out, it was the same thing. It had a dedicated fan base, but it really wasn't until it hit syndication in the 70s and people grew up with it that it got widespread appeal. Obviously, it was canceled after 3 seasons. That's not as bad as it sounds. They made nearly 80 episodes, as we talked about, and a lot of those legendary shows from back then were canceled quickly. Look at the Addams Family. I mean, I think even like Gilligan's Island only had 3, maybe 4 seasons. The Adam West Batman only had 3 seasons. So back then, a lot of shows would come and go. Of course, then you had things like Gunsmoke that would never go away. But anyway, I digress. It found its audience later. Next Generation, some were ready for it, some weren't. Season 1 was a little odd. 2 was odd. A little bit here and there. But it found its footing. And then it became a staple. DS9, I don't think had a lot of active protestations against it, but it was kind of lesser known. Like I said earlier, in my experience, it was shown late at night on a Saturday. Eventually, it too would find its audience and footing. And while we liked it in the 90s, it really wasn't until the era of streaming. That was the one show truly ahead of its time. It's just a shame that Avery Brooks has kind of become a recluse. Be nice to see him back one day, but his reasons for not returning to Cisco are what they are. Voyager, though, it was never a ratings darling. It did okay, but I think a lot of people didn't even watch it till it hit streaming. To be fair, though, being on UPN, in my hometown, we did not have UPN. There was really no way to get it. Now, in bigger cities and other areas, you could. I'd actually had friends, I'd have tape it and give me the tapes. Yeah, VHS. And then I eventually would move to a bigger city for college and all that and was able to watch it. But now the very first season, we had that. For whatever reason, that was on, I think it was NBC, but I could be misremembering. Might have been CBS. But then after that, they went strictly to UPN. So I actually had a little bit of a desert there where I didn't get to see a lot of Voyager for about 2 years, I guess, until 7 of 9 came on board. This is fun, the executive shuttle from the motion picture that gets reused all the time. Just a cool little background ship. Yeah, Voyager, I think a lot of folks didn't watch it until it was just accessible on Netflix and what have you. And the same goes for Enterprise. I traveled a lot. I was getting out of school at that time, out of college and everything, and I watched it when I could. The first 2 seasons I was able to see on the regular, but season 3 I remember was particularly hard for me to be in a place where I could watch, again, UPN. And season 4 got a little easier on me, but when you're moving around traveling, I did watch every episode, but it was a struggle. I definitely might have sailed the high seas a few times, especially when I was international, to download episodes. But that's how much I did want to watch it. I mean, that's a good thing. And it did break my heart when it was cut short. It was certainly no weaker than Voyager, and I would say stronger. And I'll even say that the Kelvin universe films, if they'd been able to make them closer together, if Anton Yelchin hadn't died, that was tragic. I mean, he seemed like a nice up and coming actor, and people say good things about him, and I don't blame them for not wanting to keep on without him. Plus, all the stars became big names. That's why you should always hire Shakespearean actors from the theater versus big Hollywood stars. You know, one thing I'll say about the Star Trek crews, pretty much any of them, with just a handful of exceptions, you don't hear them getting into weird drug things or drunk driving things. Like I said, there are a couple of exceptions, sadly, or weird Epstein sex scandal type things. They all seem to be pretty clean cut people, and that's great, frankly. Wonder why that is. Of course, after Beyond 2016, and that was kind of the transitional period, the JJ films. There's still nothing on TV. Then Discovery gets announced. Here's the captain's yacht from the Enterprise D. You know what's weird is this was in the Shuttle collection, but the Aero Shuttle and the captain's yacht from the Enterprise E were in the standard Eagle Moss collection. Although, to be fair, we never saw this being used, which is a real shame. There were several episodes they could have used the captain's yacht in Next Generation. But instead it just hung out below the saucer. Although there was... Yep, I could drop it like that. That's good. There was an episode, a model, I think it was AMT, but it might have been something else, that had a removable captain's yacht. And so you could set it on the stand. The star drive separated, and there was this, so that was cool. I'm not going to talk about the modern shows. Not because I don't have thoughts. I do. But this was a retrospective, just looking back in my mind, thinking about my memories of Star Trek, which are positive. And sometimes stuff isn't appreciated until later. And sometimes stuff's enjoyed when it first comes out, and then in retrospect goes down. Force Awakens. And sometimes something needs to find its own audience. And sometimes something is controversial when it comes out, but after a generation goes by and norms change, it just looks like common sense. I'm not saying new Star Trek is good. I'm not saying that at all. Although I would say, if you are going to get an opinion on something, you should probably watch it for yourself. I'm actually saying that now because a good friend, in fact, the same friend I first watched the motion picture with at his house, said something about Academy, Starfleet Academy. And I said, I don't think that's true. I haven't heard it. So I decided to watch it. I'll report back and let you know what I think. Because like I said, I try not to form strong opinions, even though the internet's pretty clear about it. I try not to form strong opinions for myself without at least first-hand experience. Otherwise, you might miss out on a hidden gem, or you might realize just because the hive mind, the common public loves something, you may not. There are things that I don't enjoy that other people do, and that's okay. So yeah, wish me luck on that, I suppose. I have watched most of the newer Star Trek. Most, trying to think. There has been so much. I will say this. I like season 1 of Strange New Worlds. And I really, really tried and even almost convinced myself, but I did not like season 3. I'm just going to fully admit that. I did not like season 3 of Strange New Worlds. There were a couple of episodes I enjoyed, but as a whole, no. I thought it was kind of junk. And that pains me to say. I don't like being negative about stuff. So maybe that's why I'm reflecting back on series I enjoyed. Even if I can criticize things about the early Next Generation or the way Voyager kind of lost the plot, I still enjoy them for what they are. And everything else, in my mind's eye, I have a lot of this nostalgic memories for this kind of stuff. So maybe that's part of it. Hindsight. Again, these are at the cabin, so I just thought we'd talk them over. I don't have all my Star Trek ships out here. With that, though, hope everyone's having a good weekend. Now the cats have finally quieted down. This is Misha. Catch you very soon. Next time.